Welcome to Podcast Suck, a podcast about starting a podcast, where we dive headfirst into the wild, wacky, and sometimes frustrating world of podcasting. If you've ever sat down with a microphone, hit record and thought, what on earth am I doing? Or if you're just curious about the magic behind your favorite shows, then you're in the right place. Get ready for laughs, insights, and a whole lot of what not to do advice as we embark on this podcasting journey together. Let's dive in. All right, what's happening, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Podcast Suck, a podcast all about how to start and grow a podcast. From time to time, especially recently, I've been trying to go live here to give some additional context to the episode, where a little bit of interaction with comments and whatnot. And then in addition to that, being able to reach people that may not be listening to podcasts. And well, hopefully you'll learn something and say, you know what, I think I'm going to start listening to podcasts. That is really the goal here. Regardless of where you're at in your podcasting process, journey, whatever you'd like to call it. I don't like that word. It's a journey. I hope the podcast can bring you some value as far as helping you better understand what you don't know that you don't know about the world of podcasting. So whether you're just getting started, maybe you're restarting, maybe you are thinking about getting started, whatever the case may be, I'm glad you're here. In addition to this new podcast, I started a new newsletter over on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, you're really missing out. This is a grossly underrated platform. And it was the first social media platform on the block. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people are like, but what about MySpace? It was LinkedIn and then MySpace and then the Facebooks. So LinkedIn's extremely powerful. Their newer feature of being able to, you've always been able to write an article for quite some time now. And then I think sometime last year before last, they released a newsletter option. I decided to launch a newsletter on LinkedIn because it allows subscribers specifically to that newsletter. And it also markets the newsletter to your existing followers and connections on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn does a lot of the work for you. When you write an article, it simply shows up in the news feed for your followers and connections to read. When you create a new edition of your newsletter, your subscribers are notified, as well as you being able to share it with your network and followers and connections, etc. So I deemed it appropriate that we do a quick little recap of this week's Volume 1, Number 3 of the Podcast Pulse over on LinkedIn. You can click a link in the description of this podcast episode or a link below wherever you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn, speaking of LinkedIn, and Facebook. And over on Instagram, there's a link in my bio. I'll take you right there. You click subscribe. You'll get notified when new editions become available each and every week. So this week is why podcasters quit and give up. It's actually why podcasters give up and quit, but it's the same thing. So why podcasters quit. Let's just keep it short there. Fun fact real quick. I always include a fun fact at the beginning of the newsletter. And that fun fact is that podcasts can be educational for your feline friends. That's right. Dogs do, in fact, like podcasts. In 2019, Spotify launched a My Dog's Favorite podcast, a podcast designed specifically for dogs left home alone. The show features soothing voices, relaxing music, and other sounds intended to keep dogs company and alleviate anxiety. It's an example of how podcasts can cater to diverse audiences, including your fine furry friends. So fun little podcast tip there. Look up that podcast. Heck, we'll throw a link in the show notes of this episode if you're listening to the actual podcast of My Dog's Favorite Podcast. I love that one. I looked that up today. Big shout out to my friends over at ChatGPT and all the robots working tirelessly around the clock to provide me with 5 interesting tips about podcasting, the podcast about dogs being one of them. All right, first and foremost, I want to talk about the downfalls that people experience, what I've seen happen, what I've experienced as well when you're starting a podcast and then you're trying to figure out how you're going to continue momentum and how do I stay at it and how do I record every day. Listen, there's not a day that goes by that I'm like, I can't wait to get in the studio and record an episode. I've recorded about a bazillion episodes over the past 14 years. Most days I'm recorded out, but it's my responsibility to continue to show up. It's my responsibility to the craft. It's my responsibility to my audience. It's a responsibility to those that want to learn and understand what the power of podcasting can do for their life and their business. That's why I show up. Just a quick little side note there. So the first and foremost thing I talked about in the newsletter, we talked about the pie in the sky reasons why you may quit podcasting. The first one being I'm going to get rich. I'm going to have 1 million downloads the second month, and I'm going to monetize this thing with sponsors. Unless you're a celebrity or large, gigantic name, monetizing a podcast isn't the easiest process because you have to have the numbers to be able to show for it. You've got to prove yourself month after month that you can sustain numbers in order to yield the interest of advertisers. So if you're first getting started, don't focus on how can I make money day one. Of course, you want to make money with the podcast, but your strategy should be, I'm going to start a podcast, create content. People are going to see the content. I'm going to remain top of mind. I'm going to build new relationships, and then people are going to call me and do business with me. I've lived this out for the past decade, and I'll continue to do it. I don't do any cold calling. I don't do any outreach. I network. I get in the right rooms. I speak. I do comedy. I create content. I do live videos like this that turn into podcast episodes, that turn into a YouTube video, that turn into another newsletter down the road. See, all I'm doing right now is reading the newsletter, not word for word. We're doing a quick little recap here. But the goal is to teach you what I want to teach you in the newsletter, but also get you over to the newsletter. And if you're reading the newsletter, I want you over on the podcast, and vice versa. I want you as far into my ecosystem as possible so you're consuming content with whatever works for you. Second thing I mentioned, pie in the sky thought process. I called this. I didn't put this in the article, but I may update it, or the newsletter rather. And that is, no one's listening. So what? What if I told you that I could care less how many people listen to my podcast? I really don't care. I don't. It's fun to see metrics and numbers. I think Beyond the Story has around 45, almost 50,000 downloads. That's over 10 years, and we've rebranded the show 3 times. I don't care about numbers. I don't care about metrics. I care about relationships. I care about creating content, and I care about how I can monetize those efforts by podcasting, by creating content. That's all that I'm interested in. I want to build relationships. I want to do deals. I want to do life with people that are in my ecosystem that I've decided to build a relationship because I started a podcast. So this whole idea of no one's listening, who cares? Get over that. I want to quickly move on from that because that's all I want to say to that. There's not a lot to talk about and continue to go back to when it comes to no one's listening. Who cares? Move on. Who cares who's listening? Make sure you're creating the content. Make sure that you're listening to your instinct of what you should be doing with the podcast, to build relationships, to create content. Does that make sense? The burnout express train. Creating podcasts can be exhausting, especially when you're doing it alone. Many podcasters bite off more than they can chew, cranking out episodes weekly or even daily. Burnout is inevitable at that pace. Major key. Instead of trying to be everything to everybody every day, set a sustainable schedule that you can stick to long term. I always like to say, put together a realistic schedule for you to be able to record twice a month, every other Thursday from 12 to 2. We record 4 episodes back to back, and we don't talk about the podcast the rest of the month as far as recording. The lack of passion. Listen, if you're not passionate about this, your audience isn't going to be passionate about hearing what you have to say. Now, that's the gloom and doom section of it. I've now included some tactical things you can do, and I'm going to run through them really quick because I have a call right now, and I just wanted to see and challenge myself and say, can we go live, crank out an episode of Podcast Suck, and make it to our call within a reasonable time frame? So, Kevin, if you're watching this, I will be right there. Number 1, find your unique voice. Number 2, build a solid content calendar. Plan out your content so you know exactly what you're posting, when you're posting, where you're posting. Plus, you can analyze that data and find out what content works better where. Embrace the hustle. I can't stand that word because everyone's a hustler and an entrepreneur, bro. But you have to embrace the hustle of having a podcast. What's possible? I talk about that a lot. What's possible by saying, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast. I talk about that a lot in my talks because I love saying it and talking about it because it gets me excited. If I can get excited, I can get other people excited. If I get other people excited, they'll take action. Connect with your audience. When you post micro content, people leave you a review. People comment, like, share. get back to them and reply back to them and thank them first and foremost. And then next after that, make sure you're engaging with them and giving them thoughtful replies. That's very important. Keep learning and growing, and don't stop until you actually know everything that you need to know, which is never. Do you understand that? There is never a time where we know everything because we don't know anything. It is the true secret to happiness. All right. This episode of Podcast Suck, recapping our new newsletter, the 3rd edition, Volume 1. Number 3 over on LinkedIn. It's called the Podcast Pulse. Thanks for tuning in to Podcast Suck. Thanks for tuning in live here on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. I think we did all that right. If not, well, we're going to try again harder next time. If you have any questions about this video, questions about the newsletter, questions about podcasting, anything on the show, please do hit me up. I hang out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And over on YouTube, I do respond to each and every one of you lovely people. It is my pleasure. Until next time, friends, just get out there and do it. Just do it. Remember that small little company that created that phrase? That was for a reason. All right, before I go, the quick story behind that, as I understand it. It was the late 70s. Nike just got done with their big ad campaign. They were sitting with their ad agency. They were trying to figure out what they want to do next. And I think one of the ad agency people looked over at Nike, one of the Nike guys or gals, and said, "Man, you guys just do it." I'm told that's the story. And if it's not a true story, it should be. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We sure do appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you consume podcasts. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please leave us a review and share the show with someone you know should start a podcast or may already have one. And remember, podcasts suck if you don't have one. Until next time, friends.